For me, I suppose is the incredible ability of the program being a platform to bring together very important actors and bridging China and the UK all together. But also it has the power and the ability to bring the best minds of expertise, both here and through working with the Chinese stakeholders, but also by through BSI to bring all the international experts leading in those sectors that we work on.
BSI presents The Standard Show, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the standards with Matthew Childs and Cindy Paragill. Today's episode is on the UK-China Business Environment Programme.
Hello and welcome to The Standard Show. My name is Matthew Childs and the aim of this podcast is to bring you the stories behind the standards. Now, the UK-China Business Environment Programme is a UK government initiative that aims to create a more transparent and improved business environment in China. And in this special episode of the podcast, we'll be looking at one important aspect of that programme, known as the International Standards Strand. Managed by BSI, this standards project started in June 2019 and ran for 3 years, up until December 2021. It's a significant project for supporting trade and innovation between the UK and China. As Scott Steedman, Director General for Standards here at BSI and overall Director for the project, explains.
The significance of the China Standards Project was to really support the engagement of Chinese industry and business in the international standards system. The UK is a leading player in the international standards community, and it's very important for the global economy that major countries all over the world are participating fully in that international standards system. So they are sharing the development and consensus building of what good practices look like across business and industry, and then they are adopting those standards back in their own country, as we do in the UK, to support their industries and to create that very simple passport to trade, allowing supply chains to operate across the world in an agile and resilient way. Standards, international standards in particular, are a huge accelerator of innovation. And so building the Chinese capacity to participate in the stakeholder-led international standard system is really important for UK interests and for the global economy and sustainable development more broadly. The alternative is that countries develop their own standards, and we persist with a sort of 19th century, 20th century fragmentation of the global economy, which doesn't help business, industry, consumers, or governments to achieve the huge ambitions that we have around sustainable development, the net zero transition, reduction of carbon emissions, and the digitalization of the global economy. So what was really significant about the Standards Project was that it would enable us to work together, the UK and China, our experts cooperating, to learn more about the development and use, adoption of international standards and how countries can step up to join the global economy in the most efficient and effective way. BSI is appointed as the national standards body for the United Kingdom, and so we provide the infrastructure for UK-based stakeholders to participate in international standards making. And we've developed over many years a very strong relationship with our opposite number in China, which is called the Standardization Administration of China, or SAC. And SAC is part of the very large Chinese ministry, the State Administration of Market Regulation, or SAMR, a very powerful ministry managing the Chinese economy. So our relationship with SAC has grown over the years, and I signed an MOU on behalf of BSI with SAC back in 2013, actually, to support the mutual recognition of standards and cooperative work on new areas and emerging technologies. And so it was a great pleasure to see our relationship grow over those years, and to be able to, with the support of the UK government, to launch the Standards project, which could develop our relationship to a new level, and we could start seeing opportunities to cooperate on areas like smart city technologies, sustainable cities, building information modeling, governance, standards for the sharing economy and e-commerce. And we could start discussing these in more detail than we've been able to discuss in our relationship previously. So I saw the Standards project as a really important enabler for the Standardization Administration of China and for BSI to develop our relationship to a new level altogether.
Now, as well as from Scott, we'll hear from some of the other key players from the UK and China involved in the development and implementation of the Standards Strand project. They share not only some personal reflections about the project's successes, but also those of a more personal nature too, such as the one you heard right at the top of the episode from Sujun Zhou, who was the programme coordinator at the British Embassy in Beijing. We'll also hear about a few of the challenges of delivering the Standards Strand, not least of which was trying to run a major international business engagement programme during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, we'll also hear what happens next, now that the project has formally come to an end. But we begin at the beginning and the origins of the programme. And here again from Sujun Zhou, talking about how it all started and her thoughts on its overall success. She's followed by Ash Green, also from the British Embassy in Beijing. Ash is First Secretary Trade Policy in the Trade Policy Unit. He also shares his views on the programme's success and on the strategic importance of the Standards Strand, and how he believes it supports the UK-China trade relationship.
So the Prosperity Fund global programs have a range of thematic focus, and business environment was one of them. I was very lucky that I joined the FCDO program team at the very beginning of the funding launch. So at that time, we considered the strategic areas to focus on in order to improve the business environment here in China and meet the Prosperity Fund's secondary objective to benefit the British companies. At the very beginning, we cast the net relatively wide to research over 10 areas, giving examples of fair competition, public procurement, and also including standards, of course. And then eventually we narrowed down the focus to 5 strands. So they include standards, anti-money laundering, commercial dispute resolution, intellectual property protection, and investment environment. So those areas essentially were chosen because firstly, either British or other international companies have raised concerns in these areas, or the rules-based international economic system has identified gaps in China for improvement for the purpose of global economic integration. And then secondly, it was essential that the program is also demand-led, which means that the Chinese government has the willingness to cooperate with the UK to undertake further reform in these areas. So eventually, based on those 2 major criteria, we selected those 5 areas. I think overall that BSI has progressed substantively on the major program outcomes. So my personal evaluation of the Standards Strands is that it has largely delivered the agreed objectives, bearing in mind over very challenging circumstances of UK aid reduction and also the COVID pandemic restrictions. So since 2019, when the Strand was launched, the Strand subsequently launched a few pilot projects to promote the adoption and use of international standards in 3 areas. So firstly, BSI has worked with the local government and also companies in 4 Chinese cities to implement standards. It focuses on management system for sustainable development in communities. And then the second area was that BSI partnered with, again, 3 companies to implement standards to manage anti-bribery measures in organizations. And then thirdly, BSI partnered with one organization in Beijing to implement standards for more sustainable construction and more sustainably operated buildings using building information modeling. And in China, and just to set the scene here, it is quite typical for the national and subnational government to try policies and approaches, in this case, specifically the standards or international standards, as a starting point. And then they often tend to scale it up more widely to amplify the pilot impact. The nature that more cities and organizations joined the pilot scheme itself is itself an indicator of success. So I really do hope that in the future, more will follow the course after the program ends to continue to deliver the program impact in a sustainable way. So then moving on to the second main objective of this strand, it's on the development of international standards. BSI has provided capacity building to the Chinese standard bodies and also experts involved in the joint working groups on how to develop better proposals for international standards. To give specific examples, China and the UK submitted co-developed proposals on e-commerce and organizational governance to ISO already, and further proposals are being developed in these 2 areas, also in manufacturing as well. Finally, it is worth to highlighting that this project is really highly recognized by the Chinese government at ministerial level. Although the program will come to an end in December 2021, there will still be non-order funding support to build on the legacy of the program's success and also look to expand new areas of cooperation, such as in AI and education. I would also like to say that personally, I have found it really intellectually challenging as well as rewarding to collaborate with BSI on this project by bridging China and the UK on subject matter that stands so central to international trade.
So kind of the current international system has been a really strong route for the UK to exercise global influence. I think everyone will agree that the BSI is world renowned and influential in developing standards in international institutions. And I think it's fair to say the UK punches above its weight in terms of standard setting bodies and influencing the kind of standard setting process globally. And so I think, building on that, capitalizing on that success is really important. And the program overall, I think the key thing to my mind was that it really enjoyed the benefit of relying almost solely on relationship building and exchanges between technical experts across a range of different sectors. So I think, we were talking sustainable cities, organizational governance, e-commerce, BIM, and all those areas were from a technical perspective, exchanges between experts. And I think that technical focus afforded the cooperation a degree of isolation. I mean, it meant that the work was able to continue fairly consistently throughout various events of the past few years. I think I'd be remiss, as we all would now, to kind of not address COVID, which emerged fairly on in the program's life cycle, and it led to some fairly major challenges. I think standardization has historically primarily revolved around face-to-face meetings. So being forced to start virtual meetings was difficult, but I'm really proud of the way that the team managed to demonstrate the effectiveness of the alternatives on offer. And actually moving to virtual engagement meant we were able to have a more frequent engagement at lower cost. So from my perspective, I was personally able to speak at multiple events across China, but also in the UK, which I think, if they had been solely offline events, as was the trend pre-COVID, it's quite feasible that, I wouldn't have been able to make a lot of those engagements just for cost and time reasons. Whereas because they happened online, I was able to personally see a lot more of the work of the program than perhaps I ordinarily would have in my role as SRO. I think, it's important to say, like everywhere, I don't believe that online engagement is a full substitute for face-to-face engagement. And I say that primarily because if I did, I'd be talking myself out of a job. But I do think that we've shown kind of, across the UK-China relationship that, whether it be travel restrictions in COVID times or geographical distance in pre-COVID and hopefully soon to be post-COVID times, we can continue to engage to the mutual benefit of both of us. And I think also I'd like to say, the technical nature, as I mentioned earlier, of the program gave us the ability to build trust with the Standards Administration of China that I don't think we'd have necessarily been able to achieve without the level of expertise we had at our disposal as part of the program. And that enabled us to build really good relationships, which helped facilitate really good discussions. And I just think the level of detail that you can get to and the relationships that can be built are much more effective when you have experts in their field sitting down, talking to one another. More generally, standards and regulatory issues are becoming increasingly important part of our diplomatic engagement, both with China and across the world. And I think the program really gave us an edge engaging with key Chinese standards bodies, and also gave us greater insight into how they work, what their motivations are, and where their interests lie. I think that was really key. You could see from the animation in some of the discussions that we'd really struck a chord in some of the areas we were working. I think it's important for me to be clear that there are areas where it's not in the interest of the UK to work with China, and where China is developing its own national standards. However, there are areas where the engagement can really support our wider diplomatic efforts, as well as our trade and investment promotion. And I think my particularly favourite example of that is the UK-China joint standards proposals on organisational governance and e-commerce, which were developed under the programme and presented to ISO last year. The latter in particular is really exciting from a trade and investment perspective because China has the world's largest e-commerce market, and a UK-China jointly developed standard on guidelines on sharing of product quality assurance related traceability information in e-commerce supply chains. I'm assured that all standards in ISO are as catchily named as that one. I think shows a real commitment to work with China and to improve the quality of the Chinese market, which ultimately could bring a massive benefit to UK retailers. In terms of joint proposals submissions, I think that was one of my favorite aspects of the program, because a lot of what we do is focused on influencing and kind of affecting behavior, but this one was us working together with China to jointly develop proposals. So the organizational governance proposal, for example, on internal investigations of organizations, which was presented to ISO last year and accepted last summer, is a really great example of that, where it was a proposal covering conflict of interest in organizations. And as part of the program, we worked through the development of that. We improved China's proposals process, and we jointly submitted something to ISO which got accepted, which I think is a really great example of where we can work together. I'd also highlight the work on remanufacturing, where late last year, just before Christmas, we were kind of engaging in the final engagement activity, and approval was at ISO. There's a proposal for a new subcommittee to sit under ISO TC 323, circular economy, where this work is going to take place, and we're looking at proposals on terminology and general requirements of remanufacture. So I think this one is kind of less well developed than the other two. It's still in the proposal stage, but that's a really great example where we can continue this engagement once the program wraps up. One of the things that this program delivered is an evidence base for some of the things I'm saying, and the key part of that was the research we commissioned from the Centre for Economic and Business Research, which estimated that China's increased adoption of international standards could boost substantially the economies of both China and the UK. And I think that's a really important point to reiterate. The report estimates that the UK's GDP boost could be up to £1.1 billion per year, and China's own GDP could be boosted by 6% or more after 15 years of increased international standards adoption. So when we're talking about the UK's levelling up agenda, we're talking about China's own desires to kind of rejuvenate old industrial bases, particularly in the north. There's a really easy way of boosting the economies of both the UK and China, and that is through increased harmonisation of standards and standard setting.
As well as some of the overall successes and long-term benefits of the programme, both Sujan and Ash refer to some of the outcomes of the Standards Strand, including new standards proposals being developed at ISO, and in particular in the areas of organisational governance and e-commerce. We'll come back to those later. Now, the operation of the Standards project was managed by BSI through our International Projects team.
BSI's International Projects team has worked in over 50 developing countries and transition economies over the last 20 years. Its technical assistance projects are designed to help improve countries' quality infrastructure system, trade and investment flows, and to facilitate increased opportunities for market access by bringing procedures into line with international standards and requirements. In those countries, they work with the institutions responsible for standardization, certification and conformity assessment, testing laboratories, metrology, accreditation, market surveillance, consumer protection and technical regulation, as well as with private sector companies and professional associations. Funded predominantly by public sector bodies and institutions, the Technical Assistance Project cover a wide range of sectors, including manufacturing and processing, infrastructure, food safety, health, environment, energy and low carbon technology, digital, services, procurement, and governance.
Now, for most of the duration of the Standards project, the implementation was led by BSI's Chris Brown, as he explains.
So I went out to Beijing in December 2019 for about 3 weeks to help set up an office, to identify and recruit local staff, to meet colleagues from the team, and also engage with the embassy as well. And I went out again in January, and we had a very successful sort of kickoff, if you like, with our Chinese counterparts. So from the Chinese government agencies, we worked in about 12 sectors. And we managed to convene about 50, 60 already the key people in the room at the same time. And then, as we all know, COVID kicked in. I came back to UK and have been there ever since. But I've been engaged day to day with my China team since then, and also with our counterparts, government agencies, and the embassy on a sort of bi-monthly basis. So that's really an overview of how I've been working, if you like. Taking a step back and looking at what we really tried to set out to achieve, and why the UK government and the Foreign Commerce Development Office sort of really funded this program. The big success was to support China's engagement in international standards. And a lot of that was by sort of reducing the fragmentation of standards, working to redress fragmentation of international standards in China in particular. And that has been successful across particularly 3 sectors. In good governance would be one, the construction sector or building information would be one, and sort of sustainable cities, and lots of cross-cutting themes too. We've done some research into this, and that there is a possible benefit to the UK economy of about over £1 billion per year if China adopts international standards, in particular the sectors that the UK will be interested in to export its products to, and also receive standards, products up to international standards into the UK. So I think engaging China in the international standards setting and adoption has been a big success. I just mentioned some of the sectors that we've worked in. So we did these through pilot projects. China sort of traditionally has piloted initiatives, as in Shenzhen, which was a little fishing village and became this sort of massive megacity, and the same in our project. We piloted good governance or anti-bribery measures in 3 organizations in China. So one was a wholly foreign-owned enterprise. One was a sort of local government think tank, and one was a medical technology company. So a different range of enterprises. We piloted 4 standards in 4 cities to do with sustainable development, different cities across China, and also in building information. We had a very successful pilot in Beijing for sort of greener construction and infrastructure. So the pilots, although they took time to get going, were very successful. And that's a sort of a blueprint for the future rollout of standards in those sectors across China. And we're still very much engaged with our counterparts, even though the project has come to an end. I think another success would be working very closely with our, BSI experts and our Chinese counterparts on getting the Chinese to develop and submit better proposals for international standards. And what I mean by that is traditionally, international standards have been set by the USA, UK, France, Germany, and Japan. And of course, the world has changed and moved on. China is now the second biggest economy, so therefore it's probably right that they should have a say in developing international standards. But until recently, they had very little success, or obviously no success, due to perhaps the quality of the proposals they designed, taking into account international considerations and so on. They tended to look at their standards as through a very China lens. And we've been very successful in getting approval of standards which China has come up with, if you like, working with them to get them through ballot and to get them approved at ISO level. In the fields of e-commerce would be one, and also another one under organizational good governance, which is to do with internal investigation of organizations. Whereas the e-commerce one, so you're talking here transnational payment, a massive issue in quality assurance and traceability and trust. And then a third sector is in remanufacturing, which is very closely linked to what came out of COP26. We have 6 proposals in the pipeline. So I think that's been a great success, working with Chinese colleagues as equals to develop proposals. And we still have working groups in place to continue the development of those standards. I think for success would be, we've done a very successful piece of research into improving the understanding of the economic and social impact of adopting international standards in China. So really, why should China adopt international standards if they're done well enough on their own, with picking and choosing or cherry picking which standards they like and which ones they don't want? Whereas we've been able to point out that across a number of big sectors, agribusiness, construction, finance, services, you name it, there is a fairly massive benefit, particularly in not the big government run organizations, but the small and medium enterprises further down the chain, for them to adopt international standards. And we presented that work to the Chinese government in December, and it's gone very well. And then finally, I think our communications, if you like, we've produced 2 very high quality magazines in English and Chinese. With interviews of our partners at both sides, both ends, and these have been widely circulated. So those, for me, would be the success stories from the project.
In his reflections on the practical arrangements of the project and its successes, Chris mentioned the UK Embassy, and obviously we heard earlier from Ash Green and Sujun Zhou. But another key member of that UK Embassy team was David Lambert. David was Programme Manager for the overall Business Environment Programme. He explains his role and also some more about the pilot projects of the Standards Strand on sustainable cities, anti-bribery management, and building information modelling, or BIM.
So I joined the embassy as program manager for the Business Environment Programme, which is made up of several strands, but the most important one from my perspective was the International Standards Strand of the Business Environment Programme. So I was working very closely with the BSI side, project managers, and our stakeholders in China to oversee the activities that were involved in that programme, and kind of planning for the events and attending some of those events and speaking on behalf of the British Embassy and representing the UK interest in those events too. When I first joined the programme, then we were kind of just getting started and agreeing what the scope was. And then it seemed to be quite slow progress in kind of setting up working groups, finding the right experts, identifying the needs and priorities. And then it was only in kind of the last 6 months, maybe 9 months of the programme, that we really started seeing a lot of actions coming out. So for the groups that have been developing new proposals, then getting those proposals together, submitted to ISO, balloted at working groups. A lot of the successes we've had there have really come at the very end of the programme, near enough. So I think a kind of key lesson learned is that standardization initially moves slowly, but at the same time, it can move quickly once you get the momentum going, and that it's important for the program to be able to kind of run to its natural conclusion if you want to actually get the full benefit of these collaboration opportunities. So I think the program has been very successful in the kind of the last 2 years in achieving some of the main objectives were around the pilot projects. So this is where there were international standards already existing, usually published by ISO, where we found possible organizations in China who could pilot those standards. So the successful pilot projects were across 3 different industry sectors, which included sustainable cities, anti-bribery management systems, and BIM, building information modeling. So we were very pleased to be able to find some organizations in China who were kind of appropriate and willing to pilot these standards. And for all 3 of those industry sectors, then we've had very kind of positive responses from those organizations that have piloted them. So, for example, in the sustainable cities one, there were 4 areas in China, two kind of sub-districts of Guangzhou in the south, 1 in Tianjin and 1 in Chuzhou in Zhejiang province. And they were all piloting the ISO 37101 series of standards. And they reported back how that had impacted their kind of development of those areas of the cities, and how they'd seen the benefits that following those standards processes had brought them. And then likewise in the anti-bribery management, there were 3 organizations involved across a kind of range of different areas and again industries. And again, they reported that they'd had some good results from the first few months that they've been piloting these standards. And for the BIM project in Beijing, there was a construction site piloting the BIM ISO 19650 standard. They estimated that they'd saved 15 days worth of their construction because of the modeling they were doing under the ISO standard, which is some clear kind of tangible results of how using those international standards has been a successful just in those pilots. And obviously, if we're advertising the benefits of those to other companies as well, so that they can understand how international standards can help them. I think some of the challenges have been probably around, I think, the contrast between the kind of the pace of ISO and international standards generally. Obviously, if you're developing new standards proposals, it takes a lot of time, and you need to kind of go through the processes, establish your working groups, consultations, and all those sort of things that standardization experts will be familiar with. I think the challenge was from the UK government point of view, obviously, because of COVID as well, budgets have been kind of very changeable and kind of driven by each financial year. So trying to marry up the kind of short term, we've got this amount of money for this amount of time, along with the kind of longer term actual how standardization works, that if we want to set up a working group to develop this standard, it needs to take a certain amount of time to do so. That's been quite a challenge, and on a number of occasions we had to kind of rescope the program or think about kind of new areas to focus on depending on the budget available, which was quite a challenge. And I think the other key one, I think we can't go without saying that COVID has been a big challenge for a program trying to build international relationships between China and the UK. And I think I'm sure your listeners are well used to all the impact that COVID had on their life, but I think particularly the idea that face-to-face meetings were previously kind of paramount in discussing standards, and moving those to virtual meetings has been a bit of a challenge, but at the same time it's meant that people can speak more often to each other and it's much lower cost, and you can include a broader scope of participants too. So I think there's been some upsides. Another lesson learned is the difference between the kind of technical standards discussions and the broader political bilateral relationship. I think your listeners are also probably aware of the kind of broader UK-China relationship challenges over the last couple of years on various issues. But despite that, then we've had effective discussions at working level of standardization experts speaking to each other about proposals, exchanging ideas, and we had some really kind of productive relationships built in those groups, despite the kind of the high level rhetoric that you'll be reading about in the newspapers. It's been interesting to see that contrast between the working level and the higher level headlines.
Here on The Standard Show, we really welcome your feedback. Please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts, particularly if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Find and follow us on Twitter @Standard Show and on Instagram @The Standard Show. And check out the show notes for all of the ways to get in touch.
Now, earlier I said that the UK-China Business Environment Programme is a UK government initiative that aims to create a more transparent and improved business environment in China. To help meet that overall aim, the Standards Strand project focused on some desired outcomes, which have been mentioned by some of the guests so far, but in this next part of the episode, we'll look at these in a bit more detail. The first is the improved quality of Chinese proposals submitted internationally. These are proposals for the development of new international standards at ISO and IEC through close collaboration between experts from the UK and China. And the second is improved adoption and use of international standards in China. For some insights on this, I spoke to BSI's Jeff Visser.
This was really to look at the general picture of encouraging the adoption and use of international standards in China. And so I was driving the different sectors that we were dealing with under the program to encourage both the adoption and publication of international standards as Chinese standards, and then a second part of that project was to look at what we called pilot projects, where we would test the use of recently published or standards under publication, in the process of being published. We would test those standards in organizations in the Chinese context. So I was driving that out, coordinating the work in the sectors that were chosen to work under the outcome one of the project. The successes of the program was to work in the Chinese context with the technical committees and the organizations that were adopting international standards in China, and to basically to understand the importance and to get better understanding of the importance of adopting international standards in China. It sounds a little bit almost counterintuitive to look at this, because China does have a very good track record of adopting international standards, but up until now, it's almost been a parallel process, or a bifurcated process, for lack of a better word, where you have the adopted standards are used very well for Chinese products for export purposes, but there seems to be a different, almost parallel process for standards used in the local context. And through this project, I think we started to bring those two worlds much closer together. And in the Chinese context, certainly a large commitment, especially where it comes to new standards. We've seen a marked improvement in terms of using new standards as straight up adoptions of international standards in the Chinese context, very a lot more readily than was done in the past. In terms of delivering on our output, we certainly found that we could work together very well. The Chinese counterparts and the UK counterparts work very, very well together in terms of sharing expertise. The UK stakeholders have a very strong and long-standing relationship with the standardization program. I would like to say that one of the benefits we realized almost unexpectedly was that we could do a remarkable amount of work using online platforms, and there was not the need that we had designed into the program initially to have contact visits and training and physical training and those kind of things that we'd envisaged early on in the program. So we got a lot done using the online environment and the tools that were available. Many of those tools have evolved even in the short space of time that we've been, using them over the course of the program. So these have now become almost a staple in terms of the way in which we can work collaboratively in a space such as this. So we achieved a lot, and I think that's been a great lesson that we've learned in that respect. In terms of the use of standards in the Chinese context, we learnt a lot as well in terms of the projects where we had pilot projects. We experienced a great commitment by the Chinese organizations that were implementing those standards, a huge commitment to implement those standards and do it very well and to report and share information, which we certainly were grateful for and certainly benefited a lot from our project in terms of the lessons learned, in terms of the benefits realized. And these were very measurable and tangible benefits to those organizations that were implementing those standards. So they used the international standards. They found benefit in using those international standards, and they shared that information, which I think was a really positive outcome of the project. So I think all round we were very grateful and very happy with the progress made under the project. Equally, what I found incredibly rewarding and was and encouraging was the degree to which the Chinese counterparts, the people who were working with us in China, the coordinators of the mirror committees and the organizations in which we were running pilot projects, their willingness and their eagerness to do work. You would it's pretty much unheard of in in other organizations that I've been to in terms of the amount of work that was just done overnight in terms of making sure that the project was a success. And so it was really encouraging and really positive to work with both sides in this case. So just from the willingness of both parties to just get this job done and to get it, and really I think yes, they realized the benefits at the end of it all, but in many respects they were acting as volunteers, and certainly we benefited from that in terms of being able to successfully complete the project as we did.
Now, Jeff and others have referred to those pilot projects. For a bit more about these, I spoke to BSI's Jennifer Bissett, who played a key role in what she describes as the backstage of the project, in the planning phase, building the team, dealing with communications, and also monitoring and evaluation. But she starts by telling me about her personal experience.
I think what I can say for me is that it's been an incredible journey, really spanning nearly 3 years, actually. So I've had the privilege actually of being involved from the very inception of the program. So really understanding the needs, the project objectives, how we can help achieve them, all the way up to the project completion. And that's been quite a unique experience. And obviously, it's not always been easy. We've had some challenging situations to face. From prioritizing which sectors to focus on. There were so many areas we wanted to collaborate on, to managing the project during the global pandemic, and also dealing with the impact of the pandemic on our project funding, which caused a bit of stopping and starting in the project. But we managed to get through this. And I think also what I would add is that this is obviously one project that I was managing, but I was managing it in parallel with others. And it just brings me just to explain that the team I work in is called International Projects. And the purpose is really, the purpose of international projects is really to try and improve people's lives by realizing inclusive and sustainable development, mainly in developing and emerging economies. And the way we do this is very much like through this project, where we try and build up a country's quality infrastructure. So we're trying to identify areas where we can reduce barriers to trade so that it can help encourage investment, create more opportunities to access global markets. So this program has been is very much a flagship program for BSI, and my role has been in making sure it's delivered successfully. So the key successes of the Standards Strand, I'd like to say there were many and at different levels, but if I had to pick out three, I would say the first one was really around moving the dial and on improving the adoption and use of international standards in China. Now, we did this through capacity building, through engaging at technical level. But one of the areas where we really had a bit of a demonstrator effect was by running pilot projects. So we had 8 pilot projects that were adopted in different sectors. So we had 3 in what we call organizational governance. So we were looking at international standards in anti-bribery in different types of organizations. For example, one around medical technology, one around forestry. We also had 4 pilot projects under sustainable cities, looking at standards in sustainable communities for what is considered small cities in China. And we also ran a pilot under BIM. So this is the Building Information Modeling for a construction engineering company. So these pilot projects to me were very successful in first of all, showing that there is an interest in China in these international standards, but also in trying to implement the international standard and understand what are the challenges in doing so, and what are the benefits, obviously, of using these international standards. And I think it's a success for this project, but it's also a success for us in understanding how these types of pilots can really help draw out the benefits of international standards for other projects in other countries.
Developing relationships and networks are critical for the success of any large-scale project. But they were particularly critical for the outcome of the project, which was looking at improved quality of Chinese proposals submitted internationally. These are the proposals for the development of new international standards at ISO and IEC. Now, these relationships were certainly put to the test during the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's Jennifer Bissett again.
I think if we look at another success, so a second success, I would say, is trying to where we were trying to improve the quality of the proposals that China was putting forward to international standards organizations such as ISO and IEC. There was a real constructive dialogue between the China and UK working groups that we established in a number of sectors. And initially, we had designed the project with a very traditional approach of, classroom style trainings, etc. But then, as we progressed in the conversations, we shifted our approach. Partly also because of COVID, we had to do everything remotely. But we really, I think we got to the experts got to better understand each other, and they learned that it was much more effective to share experiences as they worked on certain proposals. So the success for this part of the project was really this positive, constructive dialogue and learning on the job. And it led to basically, the program supporting 3 new work item proposals, which in the standards world is quite an achievement, because it does take a lot of time to shape and to shape these proposals and to make sure that they're relevant and useful. So those achievements were made in different areas. So again, in organizational governance, looking at internal investigations of organizations, but also in e-commerce, looking at product and logistical traceability, and also a lot of discussions around remanufacturing. And the project also supported what we call a preliminary work item proposal. So this is more like a marker in the sand. It's saying that we're looking at an area where we want to work on it, we want to collaborate, but there might still be some work to be done. So a lot of discussions took place, and I think, to me, just the conversation taking place, that was one of the positives of this outcome. But the measurable achievement here was really the proposals that were put forward, and I think the key success of that is that although once the project ends, the proposals actually then move to another forum, and they don't just end with the project.
To find out a bit more about this particular part of the Standards Strand project, I spoke to Kate Bazutel. At the time of the project, Kate was a BSI Senior Standards Manager, responsible for developing standards in the areas of materials, mobility, and manufacturing.
The UK-China Business Environment Programme was set up to include a strand on improving the quality of Chinese proposals that are submitted to international standards setting bodies such as ISO and IEC and so on. And the way we wanted to achieve this was through close collaboration between UK and Chinese experts to develop strong standards proposals. So my role on this, over the past 2 years, I've acted as a project lead for this strand. And that was around ensuring networks that were built between UK and China in the relevant areas, making sure that discussions were held, most importantly, that key priorities were identified and then developed into standard proposals that were then sent off to the standard setting bodies, ISO, IEC, and so on. Developing a robust standards proposal is the first step towards a single standard that can be used globally. And my role in the programme was to guide and coordinate the team towards achieving that. So the China BEP Standards Programme involves several aspects, and I think the most important aspect of that was setting up joint working groups between UK and China. And the team actually worked really hard to bring together stakeholders from across industry, academia, government, trade associations, and many other relevant bodies to facilitate those discussions. I would say that one of the key successes has been the way in which all of the joint working group members have collaborated and discussed the main challenges they are currently facing in their industry. And we're talking here joint working group members from the UK and from China. We've seen them really build some strong working relationships. They've shared good practice and understanding and really understood the need to resolve major challenges. We've seen them come to a common agreement by asking the relevant questions such as, what is the pain point? What's the overall aim of the standard? What does its solution look like? So I'd say the key success of this programme has been that strength of networks that were built up between two different countries. Well, the pandemic obviously presented a challenge. We were intending to hold face-to-face workshops, some face-to-face training, discussions, conferences, but obviously this was not feasible when we all went under lockdown. But I would say we overcame this very rapidly. We switched to virtual meetings straight away. And although it was a challenge and a flip side, I would say, in fact, it turned out that the challenge helped us produce a much better way of working. Because we worked virtually, the groups could have much more frequent discussions to work on drafts, iron out any issues, discuss little things. They could easily set up the next meeting for the following week, for example, instead of waiting for a physical meeting either in China or in the UK. So what we found was that the momentum that was built up did not get lost and the work got completed much more efficiently. So I'd say, in fact, the challenge that we did face allowed us to explore much more efficient ways of collaborating. If you think about it, all of our UK and Chinese experts who participated in this programme have now expressed a keen desire to continue to work together and develop new standards proposals. And that's because they've seen firsthand the benefit in sharing expertise to produce stronger proposals. So I'd say the key lesson, collaboration and cooperation between countries may be a daunting task, especially when each country has its own priorities. But the reality is that through discussion, all those differences can be resolved, can be ironed out. And what we've come up with in each case is a basic structure for a standard that addresses the challenges both countries are facing within that industry. And so far, all of our submissions to ISO were accepted. So you can actually see that what's emerged from that is that by working together with another country on the proposal itself, obviously we work with other countries on the standards once the proposals have gone through, but by working together on the proposals themselves, we really get a better chance of addressing the issues which are being faced globally by all the countries. I definitely was working across teams much more than I've ever done before, working with different people that I'd never known before, not just across teams within BSI, but also across different people externally as well. So working with the UK Foreign and Development Office, working with the Chinese standards body, SAC, CAS, several other bodies across China. So it was for me, that was a much broader set of people than I'd ever worked with before.
So, what about the future then? I asked Chris Brown to reflect on what he felt have been the key lessons learned from the project. And I also asked Ash Green and Scott Steedman about future standards collaboration between the UK and China. But let's start with Chris.
I think we've contributed to strengthening the relationship between UK and China in the area of international standards, particularly by setting up high-level working groups involving the embassy as well as Chinese government. And I know there's been a lot of controversy, if you like, in the media about engagement with China. And I think the great thing about standards is it's very neutral and it doesn't get too emotional. So it's an area where the Chinese are very keen to engage. It's an area where the UK is very strong. There's basically nothing to lose. And I think by getting that level of trust from certainly from our Chinese partners, that relationship has really been strengthened. BSI has a 25 years plus sort of collaboration with Chinese government agencies, and I think that's going to continue going forward. So that's been a really good lesson learned. I think another one has been sort of joint working. You find in these projects sometimes that it tends to be one way, whether it's UK government funded or EU and so on. It tends to be you have international experts going to a country, running training sessions and saying, this is how we do it. And one of the things I was really keen on when I took over as team leader on this, because I'd worked in China for 20 years before in private and public sectors, was so there's some really, really high quality Chinese experts out there, and bring them into the team as equals for each of the sectors. So if you're allocating resources to an expert on e-commerce, then you want, I'd say, one on the UK side and one on the China side. Otherwise, you can't begin to understand the landscape from the China side, the development, the trends, and all this sort of issue too. So I think that was a really good lesson, was just joint working, and that makes a foundation for continuing to the future when the project's funding has finished. That these bilateral working groups continue, and we had one this week in the area of organizational governance. So both sides, BSI, the Chinese counterpart, and industry all want to continue, which is great. So that joint working has been another good lesson. I just alluded to about the sort of neutrality of international standards, and I think here, you can see this sort of what you call the soft power, sort of depoliticized power of working together on international standards in a sort of otherwise quite sort of politically charged environment. That's been a really good lesson as well, and a very good way of sort of keeping sort of the working relations between UK and China. And enabling relationship building too. So I think that soft power has been another really good lesson. As sort of mentioned, working together with Chinese counterparts, now we have a much better understanding of our Chinese counterparts' way of working. That leads to a sort of an improved understanding of how they operate. They understand how we operate better as well. And again, that's all got a very good basis for long-term engagement. And I think probably finally, really, I think the big lesson for us was just communication between all of us, between, the BSI management, if you like, our team on the ground in China, keeping the embassy in Beijing informed as well, and all the different counterparts that we have for the various sectors as well. Just that sort of continual communication. I've just, learned so much about things I never knew on different topics, and the people working them, they tend to be really passionate about what they do. And I always sort of feel every time you have a call or a meeting, you're sort of learning something. So for me, it's been a great sort of journey as well about using my 20-odd years experience in China, which hopefully has benefited the project, but also learning lots of new things as well. So those for me have been the personal highlights.
It's a really great question, and as we pursue our own trade policy outside of the EU, there is a real opportunity for the UK to support a single international set of standards to act as an instrument of trade liberalisation, opening up new markets for UK manufacturers. So, if the same standards are used in every country, then UK manufacturers producing these standards are more likely to be able to maximise their ability to sell in multiple global markets without kind of, having to undertake alterations. China is the UK's third largest trading partner. So you can see there that there's a huge benefit to the UK economy to further collaborate on reducing those costly misalignments in standards. I think specifically one of the key successes to have come out of this program is the desire from both sides for the technical experts to maintain engagement and to support increased adoption of international standards. There's scope to continue these exchanges on a technical level and to work with the strong relationships we've built with the Chinese standards bodies at the national and municipal level to support mutually beneficial adoption of international standards and, where appropriate, as I've mentioned before, co-development of new standards. A more personal ambition, I guess, is I would like to focus on some UK areas of expertise to improve market access through work on Chinese standards in the more immediate term. So, we saw with our work on cosmetics, which was an 8-year government effort, kind of cross-government, working with industry and industrial bodies, we succeeded in getting China's National Medical Products Administration to agree to start accepting imported cosmetics without the need for animal testing, as long as a good manufacturing practices certificate is issued by the government in the country where the product is made. And so that's a huge, example of success there. And that's an opportunity that is potentially worth billions of pounds to the UK economy. And, I think there are many more opportunities of areas like that where we can work. I think technical and vocational education and training is a really big one. The UK is an expert, world leader in TVET, and China has reiterated its desire to focus more on technical and vocational education and training. President Xi is personally committed to increasing the provision in China. So I think there's a huge opportunity there for us to work on kind of education standards and qualification recognitions, and also sustainability and green development. You can't talk about anything at the moment without referencing green credentials and the need to focus on sustainability and ensuring the future of our planet, of our home. And I think there are real areas there of mutual benefit that we can work with China on kind of collaboration. Ultimately, the harmonization of standards and standard setting and increased adoption of international standards has the potential to be massively beneficial to international trade. Ultimately, it's a facilitator of a more seamless flow of goods and services, and an enabler of greater regulatory alignment, which is all things that we're in favor of. And so we work with our OECD counterparts to encourage greater adoption of international standards precisely because of the positive impact that it has on global trade and investment. This program really enabled us to have conversations that I don't think we would have been able to have otherwise, because there was a mutual respect in terms of the technical expertise, in terms of a genuine willingness and desire to learn from one another about respective processes and respective approaches. And those relationships, I think, will endure and will be a lasting legacy of the program in the UK-China bilateral relationship. So I'm going to have to say, I think it's the relationships that we've made along the way.
China has been playing an increasingly important role in the international standards system, which I really welcome, because it's very, very important that in these very challenging geopolitical times, countries continue to work together on consensus standards of good practice that will continue to facilitate the sustainable development of countries all over the world, north and south, developing and emerging economies, and to help them participate in the global economy in a secure and resilient manner. Very important, of course, as countries look to their own security and food and energy resilience, that they're also seeing how they will play within the global economy in an agile way through trade and innovation.
Chris Brown, Ash Green and Scott Steedman there, reflecting on the critical role of relationship building in the Standards Project, and also on the future standards collaboration between the UK and China to support trade and innovation. Now, in this episode, we have looked at two of the outcomes of the Standards Project: improved adoption and use of international standards in China, and improved quality of Chinese standards proposals submitted internationally. But there was also a third outcome, as Jennifer Bissett explains.
In parallel to those two very important aspects of, improving international standards adoption and use, and also improving the quality of proposals that we're putting forward in international standards development, we also worked on a research project, and the completion of the research project really helped to improve the understanding of the economic and social impact of international standards adoption in China. And I think that piece of research will also help us in future in providing more context and in couching some of those conversations about why using and adopting international standards are important in China. So that was a quite a pioneering piece of research, because obviously there's research out there already on why standards, the benefits of standards, the benefits of international standards, but the benefits of using international standards in China, there was limited research on that. So that was quite unique.
Now, the Standards Strand of the UK-China Business Environment Programme formally ended in December 2021, though it's not really the end of the story. Here's Jennifer again.
So what has happened since the Standards Strand has come to an end? Well, to be honest, in some ways it doesn't feel like the program has come to an end yet, because the program had not even finished that we initiated another smaller UK-funded project to provide targeted support for the adoption and use of international standards in China in some selected sectors. So this is a follow-up project which is building on the bigger program that we've had, and it's really trying to further some of the work that we've done. So, for example, work in the pilot project, but also work on the development of new proposals for standards. And once this smaller project ends, I really foresee that the collaboration in the area of standards between the UK and China will continue in some form. So, for example, the joint China-UK working groups that have been established through the program, they will continue collaborating, although probably at a less intensive level, but they will, BSI will maintain its collaboration with China through the work on jointly developing proposals for submission to international standard setting bodies beyond the lifetime of the BP, notably so we talked about e-commerce, remanufacturing, and organizational governance. And then, some of those joint China-UK proposals developed under the program, once they get accepted by international organizations such as ISO, some of the collaboration will just naturally move to existing working relationships and networks. And, eventually they will progress through the formal standards development route. So I really see this as, this program has been very much an accelerator of this relationship. And I do believe that this relationship will continue. And obviously all the relations, the contacts and the partnerships that have been established will follow suit. And I think, just as an example, we just signed recently a memorandum of understanding with China on technical collaboration in cosmetics. This was all, building on the work through the business environment program. So I think this is sort of a spring. The program has been a bit of a springboard for future collaboration. Looking back at the program 3 years later, what would I say is the legacy of the program? I think there are different levels. So if I start from a very, if I look at sort of different concentric circles, so to speak, if I look at the smaller circle, if I look at international projects, the team I work in, first of all, what the legacy is. I mean, for us, there are a lot of learnings from this project, which will help us shape and design other projects in China, as well as other projects with standards bodies around the world. So for us, this program is there's a strong legacy just in terms of how we manage such international projects with other national standards bodies. So that's really going to be beneficial as well, especially, for example, when we look at how pilot projects can be used in projects and how they can demonstrate the benefits of using international standards. I think that was quite interesting and worth pursuing, in other opportunities. If we look a little bit wider between BSI and our Chinese partners, I think the legacy is that it has really strengthened relationships between UK and China standards bodies, and this at different levels, both at the senior level, policy engagement level, but also the technical working relationships. I think the program has also had a legacy for for the FCDO and other UK government departments involved, such as DIT, because this project really helps demonstrate the important role of standards in international development, international engagement, and international trade. So I think, I hope that the legacy is that we'll see more projects of this kind. And I think if we're looking at, the wider picture, obviously, hopefully the ambition of this project, the expected impact is that it will improve trade between China and international partners, including the UK. But ultimately, this program will contribute to improving the safety of products, for example, through our work in cosmetics. It'll improve trust between organizations through our work in organizational governance. And also improve trust between businesses and consumers through our work in e-commerce. And looking at more sustainable development through our work in, for example, sustainable cities. So I think I really hope that this program not only has it had, it's met all the expected outcomes that we set ourselves to achieve, but I think the benefits of the program will be felt beyond the life of the program. Once the program has been, since the program has been completed.
Our thanks to Sujun Zhou, Scott Steedman, Ash Green, Chris Brown, David Lambert, Jeff Visser, Kate Bazutel, and Jennifer Bissett for sharing their thoughts and experiences on the Standards Strand of the UK-China Business Environment Programme for this special episode of The Standards Show. And our extra special thanks to Jennifer Bissett for her help in producing this episode. Now, if you want to find out more about the UK-China Standards Project, check out the links in the show notes. But let's finish with a couple of personal reflections from colleagues at the UK Embassy in Beijing. First from David Lambert, and then from the person we started with, Sujun Zhou.
So personally, I've massively increased my knowledge and understanding of standards as well. So in my previous career, I was working as a management consultant in London, working on a variety of different projects, and had never really considered how standards are actually a big part of everyone's life. So spending time working on that, understanding the mechanisms, how standards are created, I'm sure everyone's kind of who listens to this podcast familiar with the stories of how standards impact your everyday life, from the USB plugs or the size of a sheet of paper or the size of a credit card. But then thinking actually so much thought has gone into those standards being developed through the ISO mechanisms of experts getting together and deciding how the best approach should be taken. That's been really illuminating to think that these things that no one really thinks about in their day-to-day life, there's actually been a lot of thought and expertise going into those, which makes life operate more seamlessly. But yeah, it's not until things don't work that you then realize how important standards are.
Because I joined the program from its very beginning. At the beginning, it was very much concepts and ideas, as you would imagine, and then working it through. In 3 years' time, we already see the program fruition and also being the ability to actually realize the objectives, such as promoting China to adopt more international standards or enhance the quality of international standards that China provides to organizations like ISO, is that we actually are able to realize those ideas in a few years' time is what I find most rewarding personally.
You have been listening to an episode of The Standards Show with Matthew Childs and Cindy Paragill. Subscribe to us now wherever you get your podcasts.
You just heard a Stripped Media production.